There are a lot of factors connected with our drift away from constitutional principles. Among these, the most debilitating is our banking system, the Federal Reserve. Even though the Fed was created by an act of Congress in 1913, its operation and relationship with the U.S. government is amorphous, if not completely nebulous to the public. Some claim this is by design, for the Fed conveniently operates as a close partner when Congress needs to borrow yet more money, but an independent agency when it's convenient to insulate itself from political fallout or its part in precipitating recessions. Thus, in 1913, Congress delegated its duty to manage the money supply to a bunch of elite New York bankers who formed a banking cartel now known as the Federal Reserve System. When the Federal Reserve System was planned in 1910, it was done so without the full knowledge and consent of the people. Born in secrecy on an island off the coast of Georgia, elite bankers of the time sought to establish a central bank that would mimic European banks and ultimately give them complete control over the nation's money.
The Federal Reserve is technically owned by the member banks, so we know who owns the Federal Reserve, the member banks. But who owns the member banks is very difficult, if not impossible, to find out, because the member banks are not registered with any government agency. They're not corporations. They have the basic structure of a partnership or something very private. It may even be something unique, but it's not on the public record. And the owners or the partners of these banks are not about to let it be known. Now, it's true that you can buy stock in Chase Manhattan and all that sort of thing. You can buy stock in the Bank of America, and as a stockholder you're listed. But the true control and ownership is not on the public record. And it's easy to hide that. You can use street names, you can use Swiss accounts, you can have corporations holding stock for other corporations which are holding stock for other corporations and that sort of thing. In general, it's possible to completely conceal the controlling interest of the banks from the public.
From 1913 to 1971, the elite Federal Reserve bankers managed to slowly decouple the nation's currency from the gold and silver backing required by the Constitution. In 1971, the Fed cartel finally got Richard M. Nixon to disconnect the last vestiges of gold from money on the pretense that the British and French were redeeming too many of their Federal Reserve notes for gold, something people and countries are supposed to do when Congress and bankers print up too many Federal Reserve notes.
But when you went off the gold standard, finally, when we cut it loose in 1971, when I was in Nixon's White House, and the reason we went off the gold standard totally, was that all these dollars that we had poured out in the United States had gone abroad, and the British were coming in with our dollars demanding gold at $35 an ounce or $42 an ounce. They would have cleaned us out. So Nixon shut the gold window.
Now that the bond between gold and paper money has finally been broken, over the period of 1913 to 1971, the elite bankers print up as much fiat currency as Congress demands for all manner of welfare and warfare purposes.
Of course, anybody who likes big government, whether it's for the welfare state or for warfare, do not like the restraints of a gold standard, because then governments would have to pay for everything. They'd have to tax the people. And if the people were taxed today for all the welfare and all the warfare, all of it would end.
The relationship between fiat money and wars is direct and immediate. Wars at the scale that we know them in the modern world would simply not be possible, and they would not happen if it weren't possible for the nations who are waging those wars to raise the money from their population through the hidden tax called inflation. Inflation is caused by the Federal Reserve System, through fiat money, the creation of money out of nothing. So, if it were not for fiat money, most of the wars that we've known in recent times simply would not have been fought on either side.
Ultimately, all the money that is used to stimulate, rescue, or bail out corporate entities that are too big to fail comes from the Federal Reserve System's power to create money out of thin air, also known as monetized debt, as more fully covered in the movie Fiat Empire. The 2008 Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, and $700 billion Wall Street bailout, root cause fiat money, not subprime lending, as Treasury Secretary Paulson claimed, are only the most recent examples. Other bailouts in past decades have been Penn Central Railroad, 1970, Lockheed, 1970, New York City, 1975, Chrysler, 1978, Commonwealth Bank, 1972, First Pennsylvania Bank, 1979, Chicago Continental Bank, 1982, and the entire U.S. savings and loan system in the 1980s. The Federal Reserve System makes all this moral hazard possible. Even though the original intent of the founders was for Congress to be the most prominent branch of our government, today's congressmen are shirking this responsibility. They do this by improper delegation of their duties and responsibilities to outside agencies, committees, other branches of government, and even private entities. Why? So they can avoid blame for such things as bailouts and wars and stay in office as long as possible. To the degree they can get the courts or the president to decide on the tough issues, they can avoid making unpopular choices that could get them voted out. Money is the primary touchy issue because money represents the energy of the citizens.